This is the intersection of State Street and Market Street in downtown Hartford, Connecticut. Heading north on Market Street, Constitution Plaza is on the right or east side of the street. This is an old postcard of Constitution Plaza. This area was once the city's old East Side neighborhood, which was demolished to make way for redevelopment in the 1950s. In other videos, I've talked about the old buildings and businesses that used to exist along State Street and along Front Street before Constitution Plaza was built. In this video, I'm going to talk about what existed on the east side of Market Street between State and Talcott Streets. This is now the west edge of Constitution Plaza, but once upon a time it was home to factories, churches, and many other interesting buildings. So here's the intersection of State and Market Street, and here's a postcard showing the same intersection over 100 years ago. The building on the corner of State and Market, now the southwest corner of Constitution Plaza, was then the Farmers and Mechanics Bank. Chartered in 1833, this particular building was erected in 1850. The bank was acquired by the Hartford National Bank in 1910, and the building was sold off. Its first floor was then completely remodeled for use by retail stores. By the time of this photograph, in the late 1950s, there was a King Cole package store here. This photograph from 1908 shows the Farmers and Mechanics Bank on the right, pictured 2 years before it was remodeled for stores. A few doors down, at 18 to 20 Market Street, is a building with a distinctive facade. It replaced a building constructed in the early 1850s that was used for many years as a hotel, under several different names, first as the Lafayette House, then the Derby House, the Revere House, and finally the Columbia House. By that time it had gained an unsavory reputation. The picture on the right shows the building when it was being torn down to be replaced by a new apartment building in 1902. As the Hartford Courant reported on August 1st of that year, quote, "The interesting thing about the demolition of the building was the eagerness of the East Side boys and girls to take away the waste wood that was being thrown out of the windows. Lath, partition timbers, inside finish, and even the cornice, which was quite heavy, was seized upon by the gang as often as there was a let-up in throwing the stuff down, and dozens of improvised carts made of soap boxes were in commission, dragging off the refuse which will serve as kindling for many a fire during the cold weather when it gets here." Unquote. The building that was erected in its place was called the Nolan, built by contractor John F. Nolan. It had 6 lavish apartments and stores on the ground floor. Sadly, 2 years later, Nolan was bankrupt, and his creditors foreclosed on the building that bore his name. By the time of this photograph, in the late 1950s, the building was home to the cut-price market. But the most famous business to be at this address was Mickey's Villanova Restaurant. Mickey was the nickname of Michael Miano, a flamboyant restaurateur who was also an important operative in the rough and tumble of East Side politics. Not seeking political office himself, he became a power behind the scenes in Democratic politics. Born in Sicily, he came to America at the age of 6 in 1912. He would later recall his arrival in Hartford for a current reporter in 1988, when he was 82. When he first saw the corner of State and Market Streets, he tugged on his mother's dress and said, "Ma, I want to spend my life around here." Active in politics from the time he was a boy, canvassing on the street for Woodrow Wilson, he would go from selling fruit and promoting fights to starting the restaurant with his partner, Michael Peretta, also called Mickey. It started as Mickey's Grill in 1936. It became Mickey's Villanova with the opening of a new dining room in 1940. During World War II, the restaurant was popular with politicians, reporters, and visiting celebrities. In later years, after the loss of the old East Side, Miano moved into the real estate and mortgage business with an office on Franklin Avenue, where he remained an influential political figure. He died in 2002 at the age of 95. So here's a view up Market Street from State Street in 1906. And here's a picture of the area today. So this picture shows the Nolan that we've just been talking about. The next building north was a large 4-story structure located at 34 to 40 Market Street. It was erected in about 1872. In 1877, it became the home of Allen and Blanchard Company, wholesale grocers and importers of coffee, tea, and spices. There were partnership changes over the years. It became Lincoln, Semmes and Company in 1891, and then it became Charles G. Lincoln and Company in 1904. The company remained in the building until it moved to Edwards Street in 1949, by which time it was also a seller of food service equipment for restaurants. The building I've just been talking about is on the left in this view south down Market Street from the intersection with Kinsley Street, which is to the right. And here is this area today. Before the building that I've just been talking about was erected in 1872, there was another important building in the history of Hartford located on this spot. It was Hartford's original first public school building, the Old Stone Schoolhouse, which was erected in 1816, back when Market Street was known as Dorr Street. It continued as Hartford's first district school until the 1860s, when a new school was built, the Brown School, further north on Market Street. This is Joseph Ropes' illustration of the Hartford flood of 1854. The view is east from the old State House with the familiar Farmers and Mechanics Bank at the corner of State and Market. On the left is the Old Stone Schoolhouse. It had a cupola that made it look similar to a church. Remember that this building would have been gone by 1872. Next to it is a distinctive building with a gable front. That building still existed in 1906. It housed various businesses over the years. In 1937, it became home to the Cloverleaf Cafe. The next building north, at the foot of Kinsley Street, had an interesting history. Here's the area in the bird's eye view of Hartford of 1877. Back then, a building was located here called Cohn's Block, a 5-story mansard-roofed building. In 1878, it burned down in a fire in which 3 firemen died. The south section of the building was saved, and the rest of the structure was soon rebuilt. Connected at the rear was a large public hall originally called Cohn's Hall and later the American Theater. It opened in 1876. In 1887, the hall was acquired for use as a factory by the Barber Silver Company, which built a 7-story addition in 1894 and also acquired adjoining property on Temple Street. The company moved to Meriden around 1899 when it became part of the International Silver Company. This all was located in the rear, however. The frontage along Market Street would come to be owned by a different manufacturer of silver, the William Rogers Manufacturing Company. For this next view, also from 1906, we are still facing south, but we have moved further north to the intersection with Temple Street, which is on the right and left. Here's the old Cones block, which in 1887 became the factory, salesroom, and offices of the William Rogers Manufacturing Company, which produced silver-plated ware. The company was started in 1865 by William Rogers, one of three brothers who pioneered Hartford's silver plating industry. His business was originally located on the corner of Front and Grove Streets, where Hartford's famous Chicken Man would later have his poultry store. Rogers died in 1873, and the company was eventually taken over by his nephew, William H. Watrous, who made the move to Market Street. William Rogers Manufacturing, like the Barber Silver Works, eventually became part of the International Silver Company. In 1900, two nephews of William Rogers, Simon L. and George H. Rogers, formed their own silver company, and in 1903 they acquired the old William Rogers building on Market Street. By the early 1940s, 20 years before Constitution Plaza was built, this building had already been demolished and there was a parking lot here. Here's the area where this building stood as it looks today. Moving south of that building, to the southeast corner of Market and Temple Streets, was a building with a long history. This was Hartford's first Baptist church building, erected in 1798. It did not initially have a steeple, but one was added later. 1854 was a year of transition for the building. The Baptists had left in 1831 when they erected a new church on Main Street, located where the Richardson Building is today. An Adventist congregation moved into the former Baptist church in 1842. The Adventists moved out in 1854, and for the next 6 years or so, the building became the Market Street Chapel, organized by the Congregationalists. Around the time of the Civil War, the building was being used by the Washingtonians, a temperance organization. Then it served as a gymnasium for the Deutscher Verein. Around that time, the steeple was removed. After 1868, the former church was used as an office and workshop by a series of companies that produced sash windows, doors, and blinds. The building was torn down in 1911 to make way for the new headquarters of the Hartford Fire Department's Engine Company No. 3. During those days of horse-drawn equipment, the back of the building had stalls and a hayloft, a space that was occupied in later years by a billiard table. The firehouse's original doors swung open to accommodate horses, and they were Dutch doors with separately swinging upper halves to let the air in while keeping the horses from getting out. These were finally replaced by modern overhead doors in 1953, just a few years before the building was torn down for redevelopment. Another church was located just to the east on Temple Street. This was the Warburton Chapel. It had its origins in a Sunday school and mission church started in 1851 to serve the children of Hartford's East Side. The school occupied various spaces in its earlier years, including a brief period in the former Baptist church I just talked about. It also spent 2 years in the surviving building at 6 Central Row, and then 7 years in Washington Hall on State Street, a building I mentioned in a previous video about the area where the Phoenix building stands today. Called the Union Sabbath School, it finally found a permanent home in the new Warburton Chapel on Temple Street. Dedicated on June 28, 1866 by Reverend Horace Bushnell, the Warburton Chapel was designed by architect James Jordan and funded by Mrs. Mary Ann Warburton in memory of her husband, John Warburton. An article about the school's 65th anniversary in the Hartford Courant of May 28, 1916, described the institution's work. Quote, "The purpose of the work being done by nearly 40 teachers at the chapel is to extend a Christian influence, to prepare the young children of the East Side who attend its classes for citizenship, and to make the girls more proficient in housekeeping and domestic arts, for which purpose classes in cooking, sewing, and dressmaking are held, each of which is filled with eager young mothers who take great interest in the work. Industrial classes for boys are held several days a week, and useful knowledge, such as banking and debating, are taught. A fine opportunity to engage in athletics of all kinds is given by the new gymnasium at the chapel. Religious instruction is given on Sunday only." Unquote. The chapel finally closed its doors in 1948, and its educational activities were moved to Center Church House. The building later became the social center of St. Anthony's Catholic Parish. It was named Casa Andrea in honor of Reverend Andrew J. Kelly, who was St. Anthony's pastor for 29 years. The building was finally torn down in 1960, but proceeds from the sale of the land back in 1954 had already been used to build the Warburton Community Church on Brookfield Street, an interdenominational church that started in the 1940s at the Charter Oak Terrace Public Housing Project. As this view from the Hartford Atlas of 1909 shows, Market Street had become much narrower north of Temple Street, and the buildings on the east side of Market Street extended further to the west. That's why the buildings in the distance beyond Temple Street stick out so far in this 1906 view. The building on the northeast corner of Temple and Market had letters reading Tammany Hall. This photo is a view east down Temple Street from Market Street towards Front Street. The steeple of the Warburton Chapel is on the right. On the left is Tammany Hall, which was actually a saloon. In 1911, the building was significantly altered when it became the home of the Hartford Evening Post newspaper, a paper that was sold to the Hartford Times in 1920. The paper actually referred to the area around the building as Post Square. By 1922, the building had been redubbed the Radio Building, when it became the home of the Aetna Radiophone Corporation of America. The company was only in business for less than 2 years, and it produced one product, the Radioette Crystal Set. In the middle is an ad from an early demonstration of the set in 1922 at Wise Smith & Company. Here's a later picture from the 1950s, with the former Tammany Hall Hartford Post radio building on the corner. That building and the rest of the block to Talcott Street would all be demolished for the construction of Constitution Plaza. And here's a picture of the area today. Here's the view back south towards State Street. Here's a last view of our area shortly before it was all destroyed. There's the old Farmers and Mechanics Bank, the Nolan Building, once home to Mickey's Villanova Restaurant, the building where coffee was roasted by Charles G. Lincoln on a spot where Hartford's old stone schoolhouse once stood, the home of the Cloverleaf Cafe, the parking lot where the building once stood where William Rogers Manufacturing displayed its silver-plated ware, the fire station on the spot where Hartford's first Baptist church was built in 1798, the former home of the Warburton Chapel, and the building that housed Tammany Hall Saloon, the Hartford Evening Post, and the Aetna Radiophone Corporation of America. And here's the area after everything was demolished. And that brings us back to the area just after Constitution Plaza was built. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button. You can also check out the rest of this channel, watch some of my other videos, and if you enjoy them, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks.